Hi, my name is Mark. So for those of you who follow my channel, you usually notice that I usually do videos about tips and tricks and hacks that are usually useful for either guitar players or any type of musician really. Sometimes I transcribe a lick and show it to you guys, and usually there's something useful you can learn from it, or other times I just take a music theory related concept and explain it so that you guys can use it, and even sometimes to improve your technique if you're a guitar player. But to be honest, none of those tricks really matter that much compared to this one. I can honestly say that if you don't really take into consideration audiation and ear training, this is definitely maybe not the best skill, but the most useful skill I've been practicing over the years. And it is, if you weren't able to figure out already, notation. And I know what you might be thinking.
Oh, but will notation help with my sweep picking?
Well, not exactly, but maybe if you do it like this, but...
And will this make music theory suddenly less boring and easier to understand?
Well, it won't make you learn music theory unless you want to, but honestly...
And will it make me improvise like a Three Govern or Charlie Parker or whoever I'm thinking about right now?
Well, not exactly, but okay, I get it. You might be thinking that this all doesn't really make much sense, and unless you're a composer or a classical musician or something like it, you won't be really focusing much on notation. And at first glance, it definitely isn't a skill that everybody necessarily needs to learn. But I can tell you, and will show you right now, that the skill of notating a song is not only worth it for sight reading, music theory, and composing aspects, but also for recording and producing, making demos, practicing, all of that stuff. And even as a creative tool, it can also be really helpful. This may sound hard to believe, but let me just show you. But before I do, I just want to say, please subscribe to my channel. You're probably aware that YouTube's been acting a little bit weird lately, and if you subscribe to a channel, those channel's videos may really not show up in your subscription box, and even if you ring the little notification bell thingy below, so you'll not be notified of that channel's content. So if you want to stay tuned to my next videos, not only do I suggest subscribing and turning on all the notifications, but also follow me on social media. Not only do I post some exclusive stuff there, like improvised solos and jamming over backing tracks, and generally wherever I'm up to at the moment, but I always post there about my videos. Links for the usual subject below, but in general at Mark English Guitar. And since you're down there, please consider leaving a like and perhaps share this video on social media, I highly appreciate it. But getting back to the video itself, let's say that I have an idea for a song. And as you could see, I was playing it really sloppily. I picture it at a tempo that's really fast, and guitar players will probably understand this. It has a lot of string skipping, which when you want to do straight alternate picking, it's pretty hard to do. And because I haven't really practiced it enough, every time I try to play it at the intended speed, I end up hitting strings that weren't really the ones I was intending to hit. And that all translates to, okay, cool riff, but I still need to practice it more. Let's say that I wanted to make a song around that riff, or add that riff to a song. Sure, I could start to figure out other parts for the song and whatever, but if that riff is the main riff of the song, and I can't really play it correctly yet, I would need to spend time practicing, which is not really a bad thing, but while I'm spending time just trying to practice playing that riff correctly, and cleanly, one, I'm not really spending as much time composing and producing the song in different ways, but two, if for some reason I was getting a certain vibe of that riff, and I was getting this feel for writing that song, having to spend time practicing that riff can be sort of uninspiring, taking into consideration that you can't really continue the song because you need to practice the part of the song that you can't yet play. So way back in the day, my process would be, okay, since I can't yet play it, would be record a crappy version of that riff because I can't yet play it, or even film myself not really playing it properly. I would then practice it until it would be alright, and then when I have the time to start composing again, I would listen back to the recorded version of the riff and think of riffs or chords or ideas that could go next in the song. But now here's what I do. The first thing I do nowadays is open MuseScore, which is a notation software. Again, there are other softwares like Sibelius, which is a paid software. This is a free software. Then I create a new file so that I can start notating the song. In this case, let's just call it like notation video song test. And now here's something I usually do. In my case, I play the guitar, and I could just choose a guitar in one of these instruments, but what I usually do is I go for the grand staff, which is just a piano really, but I usually end up dividing one staff for like the lead parts and the other staff for like the rhythm parts. Like in this case, I have this riff, but maybe I want to try some chords behind that riff, or maybe try a bass line, and I can do it easily. In the case of MuseScore, it then wants me to choose the key. In this case, the riff is sort of in C minor, but we'll just use the regular C major staff. I think it might be easy to understand, especially if you're new to all of this sort of stuff. which if you are, I didn't really learn this in any music school or whatever. I tried to figure it out by myself because I needed to find a way to do some quick demos of my songs, and sometimes I couldn't really play them proficiently, like in the case of this song. In this case, I already checked out the tempo, we're around 140 BPMs, and we got notation instead of notation, smart. And you might be thinking to yourself, why do I need to learn all of these like semiquavers and semidemic quavers and whatever, when I could just tab it out in Guitar Pro? And honestly, there's nothing wrong with using Guitar Pro or something like it and doing the tabs, but if you try to use standard notation, even if you know nothing about it, just by watching some simple tutorials on YouTube, later down the line you'll be much more proficient at it, but it can be pretty useful for ear trading and sight reading, which is something that most guitar players aren't really that comfortable with. Just as a quick side note, I traded the bass clef for a regular clef, just because if you're a beginner to all of this sort of stuff, it's easier to understand and visualize things like this. And all we need to do now is figure out which notes we're playing on the guitar, or in any instrument you play, and input it into here. I'll just do my riff really quickly. Oh, and some of you might be thinking, why do I need to use a notation software when I can just use pen and paper? I'm probably guessing that not many of you will be asking this question, but for the ones thinking about it, when you notate something into a piece of paper and you can't really read it, you're not really sure that you're notating it correctly or not. But in a software like this, I only notated the first 4 notes. But just by clicking on one of them and then pressing play or spacebar, I can listen back to it and figure out if what's being played back is what I picture in my head. In this case, it is like I picture it. Let's finish this riff. And again, for the beginners into this sort of sight reading notation sort of stuff, if you don't really know where notes fit in, all you need to do is input one note. In case of music score, you just press N and you get this quarter note symbol right here. And the note I just added is an E. But if you don't know which note you just did, all you need to do is click it. And down here you can see that it says pitch E4. In my case, my riff is in C, so I know that E isn't the note I want. So I can just move it down. Now I have a D. I move it again. I have a C. If I want to do it chromatically, I just use the arrows on the keyboard. Now I have a C sharp or a D flat. In this case, it notates a C sharp because I was in C and I went up a semitone. If I wanted a D sharp, all I need to do is put it in the D and then go back one and I have a D flat. It doesn't really matter if you're just trying to play a demo, but if you want to be theoretically correct, if you don't know if you need to play a C sharp or a D flat, you can check out my video about nitpicky music theory right there. Okay, so just now I notated the first part of the riff. And by listening back to it, I realized I made a mistake, which is the first 2 notes are pickup notes, so they're not in the first beat. They're played in the end of 4. So I can just copy all of this, erase it, then paste it here. And now it's in time. Just a little detail that even for somebody like me who has a little bit of experience doing these sorts of things, since I wasn't really paying close attention to what I was doing because I was focusing on recording the video. Okay, so I'm now finished with notating the riff, and I'll play it back to you, but the first part ends here, and starting from here is just a repetition. I'll do it without the metronome. And then it could just repeat. But we have a slight little problem here, which is, if you remember, just like I said in the beginning, the first 2 notes of the riff, they are the pickup notes. So feel-wise, they start before the first beat, so that you can feel this part as a downbeat. And even though when it keeps playing, when we get to the second repetition of the riff, right here, it definitely lands with the click. The only problem being these 2 pickup notes now land on the end of 1, and we want them to add in the end of the last beat of the previous bar. So to me, it makes sense to notate it as an odd time signature. Again, to some of you, this might be sounding as nitpicky music theory stuff, but this sort of stuff is pretty useful, as we're going to see later when we want to turn this into a demo and practice it, but also for you to be able to know what you're playing, why you're playing it, and how to feel what you're playing if you get lost or something. So now all I need to do is add a time signature right here. And because we want to add an extra beat, go to the previous one and do a 5-4-1, and then turn the next one into a 4-4-1. And now as you can see, the 2 little pickup notes are being played in the end of 5, which is the last beat of the bar, so that when we start the riff all over again, it follows in with the first beat. And even though it works fine, in this case I'm not really feeling it as much as a 5-4 bar, I'm feeling it more as a 3-4 bar and then a 2-4 bar with this part. So instead of doing a 5-4 bar, I can just switch it by a 3-4, followed by a 2-4, and then back to the 4-4. And now it makes slightly more sense. Finishing up the riff real fast. And here we have the same situation again with a little pickup note thingy. We need to add the correct time signatures. And then we can progress our song however we want to. Let's just hear it back one more time. Okay, so now I think the riff is done, right? So that I can make sure that I did it correctly. In these bar lines right here, these ones that have a bar that's slightly larger than the other and 2 dots are repetition bars. So if I put this one with the dots on the inside on the last bar of the riff, and I put this one with the dots on the outside on the first bar of the riff. In this case, because the riff starts on the pickup note, I won't really put it here on the first one, I'll put it here on the second one. If I now play the riff, when it reaches the end, it should go back to the beginning and loop itself perfectly. If it doesn't loop itself perfectly, it's either because we either have some pauses here and there, or some notes are slightly longer than they should. So then, let's just check it out without the metronome, I think. So the riff is now notated. Pretty simple, right? Now we could just continue the song. For instance, if you have some other riffs that you think might sound good with this one, you can notate those as well. Or you could just start messing around with some notes. I don't know. Maybe I can just input some random notes. Okay, so just now I added this little portion right here. It's just a simple melody, honestly. And I wouldn't really say I couldn't really figure this out if I was just playing guitar and trying to figure out a melody or a riff of some sort. And in my case, because I'm slightly proficient at doing this sort of notation thingy, in general, unless it's something real difficult, I can sort of audiate it in my head and then try to figure it out notation-wise. I had this sort of rhythm and I quickly put it down. You probably saw a sped up version of it. And as you can see, it's nothing really fancy, it's mostly 4/4. It has this little bar of extra 2/4, and it has this 3/8, which might sound a little bit weird, but I can explain it. In fact, let's hear the full piece right now. Again, I stopped it there, but we could continue the song if we wanted to. And in fact, because I'm liking the direction this is going, if you guys would like to see me continue this song, just leave it in the comment section below and I might make a series out of this. But for now, let's just finish it. We'll just erase these extra bars. We'll save this. Then we're going to export it. I'll put it right here on my desktop. But instead of exporting it as a PDF file, we're going to export it as a WAV file. And now we can take that WAV file, put it into our DAW, and then program drums to it or add extra instruments to it. Again, without really having to practice that riff really hard to get it real tight, and then add all the extra stuff to it. Not only that, but when we record the song later on, because we have this playback file that we can record to, if we then play both at the same time, we will quickly hear if we're playing tightly or not. If for some reason you're rushing some parts, the playback software won't be rushing. It's perfectly in time. And even though that is a little bit sterile, and when you play it, even if you got it real tight, it won't be perfectly in time, you have something to strive for. Especially, again, if you're a beginner to all of this recording, and you just play it and you think it's done done properly. Maybe when you compare it to the super clean, perfect version of it, maybe it isn't as perfect as you might think. And again, if you want to make a little demo out of this song and you want to program drums, or you want to add some extra instruments here and there, not only can you do it in the notation software, we can also do it in the DAW, and because the playback file is representing what's in here, not only when do we know when the downbeats and the upbeats are, for instance in this part right here, I know that when it comes time for these quavers, I might want it to be accented in a different way. I might want the drums, for instance, to accent it with the snare in a different way, for instance, I don't know. And I know that this note lands exactly in the end of 2. Again, if I count it, I can figure it out. But if you're, I don't know, I guess a noob into this sort of stuff, it can be one really helpful. And for instance, we have these fast parts right here, which can serve not only, again, as a way to prepare your demos and stuff like that, but let's say that you make this demo and that you only get to record it or play it or practice it a long time after you notate it. You may end up forgetting some of the details or the correct notes and only have like a sketch version of it. And even if you record yourself playing it or record the audio of what you're playing, you'll have to figure it out by ear or by looking at your fingers, and sometimes depending on the part that might be a little bit hard to do. Not that you shouldn't learn things by ears, but I can just go here and check out the notes. And as I mentioned before, by notating stuff, you're able to try and orchestrate something different. Like in my case, in that little melody part, I added some extra chords, which is not something that like you couldn't really do if you just recorded a song, or maybe when you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work for the song, you can grab a looper or something, record a melody and try some chords. But by just selecting different notes that you either may think sound good or maybe work in a theoretical way, you may end up with chords that are a little bit different from the ones you may get if you just play around. So let's hear this little demo first like this. As you can see, nothing really that fancy. They're mostly like diatonic, harmonic minor-ish chords. I guess the song has this sort of classical vibe. We have a C minor chord right here, C, E flat, G. We have a G major chord right here with G, B, and D. Here we have an E flat major chord, F minor chord, and lastly but not leastly, another G major chord, just in a different inversion. More so that we get a little bit of separation from this chord to this chord. Same note, just in a different order, again a different inversion. And we have the same chords again, C minor, G major, E flat, F minor. Then here, it's where we get a little bit of difference, so that we don't really rely on that harmonic minor sound too much. This time, instead of a G major cadence, I decided to use a minor 4 chord, in this case a minor 6 chord. We did an A flat major chord, followed by an A flat minor chord. That then resolves to the G major chord. And again, for a little separation, after the G major chord, I do a little G dominant 7th. And in the last little step here, I raise the dominant 7th back to the root. I guess it's just that it doesn't really sound that monotonous. But yeah, let's get to the version that has the programmed drums and the little chord swells. I won't really be recording everything because my camera is running out of battery, but I'll show you my thought process. Okay, so to break it down, for those of you who aren't really familiar with DAWs and something like that, I just imported our track right here. If I just solo it, it's just what we had before. And then in this track right here, I just did these orchestral swells. I used the chords I showed you before, the chords I figured out. And in this part, it's pretty much droning on a C because we're in C minor. And then adding some spicy notes here and there just to get a little bit of tension. I just noticed I called it drums. It's not supposed to be drums, it's supposed to be orchestral swells. And as you can see by the title, I did a little drum track. Again, it's a pretty basic rhythm. Kick, snare, hi-hat, a couple of little fills here and there. And a bunch of toms near the end, because who doesn't like some toms? But yeah, let's check it out, the whole thing put together. As you can see, nothing really fancy, and again, it's not something that I am particularly proud of. The riff is just a riff I made out to do this video, and the same thing with the drums, honestly. I started out with a simple rhythm, and then sometimes here and there just accented some stuff here and there. But especially on this song, because the first part is not really that interesting rhythmically. It's all 16th notes. Sure, it has some breaks here and there, but in general it's mostly like a machine gun. I probably could have found a better groove for the drums and some spicier chords, but this was just to show you guys that by doing things a little bit differently, you may end up with a different result. I've been doing this with every single song I've composed for like, I don't know, maybe 2 years, year and a half maybe. And honestly, it's always this sort of process. And as I mentioned before, having this track is particularly helpful, because since this is completely perfect, when you either program stuff or are tracking things to it, you really know if you're playing tightly or not. And for instance, in this little part right here, where we have this offbeat thingy, it's not like it would be really hard to figure out where those notes would land in, but since before we notated it, we know exactly where those notes land. So yeah, it might sound a little bit clickbaity, but this is definitely the trick I use the most, and this is the one that maybe if I started to do a little bit earlier, it may have sped up some creative processes. But I don't know, tell me what you guys think. Again, if you end up doing any of these sorts of things, I'd really like to hear feedback from you. And even if you end up not really trying this by yourself, or think it's a waste of time, please leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. Maybe there's something you can add to this discussion, or there was something I missed, something I should have said. Again, I'm thinking of maybe composing a proper song using that riff we had before, maybe this melody, who knows, and record myself doing it. So if that's something you guys would like to see, please leave it in the comment section below. And if you have any other suggestions for videos, I have this series called Yate, You Ask I Teach. I know, pretty boring, generic, and self-explanatory title, so as you can probably guess, in that series I teach pretty much anything you guys leave in the comment section below that is either guitar or music related. We've done a couple of episodes already, I'll leave them in the playlist right there. If there's something you want me to talk about, just leave it in the comment section with the hashtag Yate. Again, in the beginning of the video I mentioned some other types of videos I usually do. You can also check those out. But I also have this series called Bass Tricks for Guitar, because for those who don't really know, I started out as a bass player, not a guitar player. So when I eventually moved on to guitar, I guess I brought some bass related stuff into my guitar playing. Because many of you didn't really start out on bass, I thought I'd share some tricks that you either may have not considered, or that can maybe revamp your playing a little bit. Again, if you want to check out my back catalog, not on Hulu, I'll leave it in the card section right there, but also on the annotations of the end screen, which will be on in just a couple of seconds, so please stay tuned. But yeah, thank you so very much for watching us. Please like, comment, subscribe, turn on all the notifications, follow me on social media, and perhaps share this video on social media. And yeah, cheers!